from a family of Whittens. And Dr. Whitten, you've heard of, was an old friend of his. He asked, Hattie said, well, why can't you make her principal? When my sister came, she was made principal here. And he said, oh, said she came. Said she's not strong enough to be the principal. He said, I recommended you as principal because I know you're like your daddy. You're strong. And my father was considered a very outstanding black man. He was a leader. And his father was a leader before him. His father died at the age of 34. But his father, in the early days after slavery, they didn't allow the blacks to come in town. And if it did, the paterolls would whip them out and sometimes hurt, injured some. And his father and 3 or 4 other blacks got together and watched for the black young who come in town to keep them from being beat up or punished. And I've heard him talk about grandfather, his father. What was his name? Grandfather's name? I've forgotten his name. But anyway, Johns Holley, and 2 other men, and one lived over there near Bramwell. He used to, when I was in school over there, he used to tell about my grandfather and him working together. Of course, my grandfather died early, but he was an old man. And he said, we used to stay down there at Town Branch, I didn't know where that was, and watch the youngs go into town and see that they weren't beat up by the paterolls and the Ku Klux Klan.
Was there much Klan activity in
They didn't call it Klan. They said it was paterollers. Said it was just people who had a high prejudice and didn't want to see the Negroes come into town, the blacks come into town. So they just beat them up and run them out. So that's the way.
So was your granddaddy Johnson, was he considered a black man or a person or one of those people of color? How was he listed?
He was listed as a black man, but he was a leader. He people had a lot of confidence in the blacks. Had a confidence in. Ask Uncle Johns, he'll do it. And the same with my father. When my father, even in my early days, I've seen white judges and white lawyers come here. Uncle Lee, if I want to talk with you. And he'd take them in the room, close the door. And I used to wonder, I was just a small child, what in the world was to talk with my dad about? But they got information from him. And they say that they had some blacks that caused problems. And they'd say, Uncle Lee, will you come down and get so-and-so? And we had 1 or 2 that fought so. And they said my father and another friend of his could go down and dismaster them because my father was very strong, tall, big, and strong. And they said, don't let Lee Holley to get you. So he would get them. So they did take them to jail or they get drunk or something like that. But
Well,
the
you
town.
went to work when you were 10 years old with this family. When did you go to school? Had you been to school before that? Or?
Yes. I went to school when I was about 9, I guess. And I was in and out of school because I have 2 sisters who were in Bluefield. And I've stayed with one of them after my mother died, and she'd say, oh my goodness, said you're sick so much I had to leave Bluefield, come down and help take care. So I didn't know that. But I went to school, and sometimes I had to leave school being sick. And first family I worked for, first my mother would allow me to go by a boarding house and wash baby diapers and iron them. And that's the only work I could do after school. But the other sisters would go to work at 7 o'clock and leave for school and go back after school. See, that's the way they worked. They worked summer and winter. But I worked later like that. I worked for a woman who formerly was a teacher, and her husband worked as a miner or something. Mrs. Peter Williams, I never shall forget, and she had 2 children. I called them mine. And you had everything to do. You had to take care of these children, roll them out in the afternoon, bathe them, feed them, make fires. In those days they had coal stoves. You had to cut your kindling. I cut a finger once cutting kindling and lake fire to cut the end of my finger off.
Were your early teachers blind?
Yeah. Oh,
Where
yes.
did they get their training? Do you have any knowledge of where they?
Yes, from Richmond, most of them. My father told about, I think I told about the first black teachers in Tazewell. Was the two mulattoes. They were really children of the masters. That Strauss woman, Mary Strauss, her mother was a slave, and her father was a slave owner, and they pushed her into teaching.
Was that
'Cause
common in the early days to have mulattoes as teachers?
Yes, that was common in many sections. And she was the first black teacher. And then Bear Warren, you know, he's very fair. His people were Strauss or someone else. And he taught my mother and father and all of us. Yeah.
So there was a history
He-
of teaching the blacks in this area a long time?
Yes, right after surrender, 1867. See, they were freed in 65, and they opened the first school in 67.
You're in Tazewell.
Mm-hmm.
Did many of the blacks leave this country completely after freedom? Or did most of them
Yes,
stay
in
and
one
work on
section,
farms?
in what they called, a boy was talking to me about it not long ago, did ask me, said, I wish you put in your book. I said, honey, I didn't know about it, that blacks had left that area. And many of them went into Lebanon. And the owners down there were better to them than some of the owners in Texas. Some kind of creek down there that had a lot of blacks working on the farm. And they were sort of cruel to them. They whipped them and rushed them around. One boy, one of the Thompson boys, said, my grandfather said they whipped him sometime and said they wouldn't allow him. He was afraid to come to the house because sometimes they punished him all night. And said he remembered him one time sleeping under a hog pen, keep from going back home, and things like that. But I never heard my mother's people or father's people talk about that suffering.
Some of the families of the Whites families still here that owned these plantations?
Yeah.
They still live in this
Yes,
region?
some of the Whittons. And one is a teacher, and Dr. Whitten is teaching at West Virginia State. So she came to me last year. I went down there, and she said, I hear that you have two books and have something about the Whittons in it. I said, yeah. She says, I'm a Whitten. I said, what from? She said, my grandfather's from Tazewell. I said, you don't mean it. She said, we made big kin, and we just joked. She's of your race. I said, I don't know. I didn't get to talk with her long. She's there with the Scouts. And she said, yeah. I said, my grandfather was a brother of old man Tom Whitten. I said, you don't mean it. She said, yes, indeed.
Well, tell about how did you then go on, when did you go to Stores College?
After my mother died, my oldest sister was teaching at Cooper, West Virginia. And she promised Mother that she would try to help take care of us and push us into school. My uncle, Horace, that taught, always said, Brother Lee, see the children get an education. The only thing get a white man can't take from them. That's where he put it. And they pushed us to school. That's what they say. So Sister had been to school in Bluefield. So she was teaching there, and she'd take two of us down there. That took me down first. And I was 8th grade. She didn't go any higher than 7th grade here. I went to her. And 8th grade, first year high school and second year high school, they had down at Bremen. I went there 3 years. And after that, I went to Story College and finished there. Well, I had two sisters teaching, and they would help me get into school. And I taught at Coretta, West Virginia, the first time I taught. After finishing Story College, I had to go to summer school to get a temporary certificate. And my first teaching, I wasn't successful, and I lost that. And Dr. Warren was living in Williamson, West Virginia, who's a cousin of ours, and he got me a school on the Kentucky side.
Well, what was before, I'd like to hear about the Kentucky schools, but before that, what was Stores like in those days? How big a school was it? What was the college like?
A Story College?
Yes, what was it like?
It was all missionary white teachers. Only blacks we had were the supervisor in the halls. And we had 2 black men, one teaching Bible. and W. Saunders, I'll never forget him. What was he teaching? We had two black teachers. But the president of Storer College was President McDonald, who came from up in Massachusetts, and his wife was the daughter of a French ambassador to France, and she'd been over there from the time she was 3 years old till she's 16. And when she came back, she married Professor McDonald, and he was our president, and she taught French.
Was McDonald black?
No, white.
White.
We didn't have a black, not while I was there. They did have a black president later.
Is it a church-affiliated school?
Yes, it's built up by missionaries from the north.
It's 70. It's a Baptist, I'm not sure.
Yes, it was Baptist.
What
The
group of Baptists
uh-huh.
it was, but
it was Baptist. Yeah, we had some
Started
wonderful.
right after the war.
We had wonderful teachers,
I noticed a lot of
dedicated teachers.
it was
He was
first black,
first
in West
black-
Virginia.
First black college in West Virginia,
I'm quite sure Virginia.
and the oldest, one of the oldest black college.
Students there?
Well, all from Virginia and West Virginia that could go would go there, and they let some of us work our way through. I worked my way. I worked in the kitchen.
I noticed a lot of people, when you discuss the migration of people from this area, they tend to go to West Virginia. I know you say they would go to West Virginia to teach, or in fact you went to West Virginia to go to school or the store. Why do you think people from this area would go to West Virginia rather than schools in Virginia?
Well, they graduated usually from Bluefield State,
Yeah, it was close by.
and that's close by school. But when they got a certificate there, they had to go to West Virginia because they paid more. They paid almost nothing in Virginia,
West Virginia.
and pay more, and they didn't take but so many blacks, and it didn't go any higher than the 7th grade, you know.
You're in Virginia.
Here in Tazewell for a long time.
Do you remember when the mining started around
The-
here? Was that how old were you? Wait a minute till our clocks.
I forget, I got an old clock about 100 years old.
Okay, go ahead. When did the mining start? When you were a child, was there much mining going on or in this area, coal mining?
I heard it wasn't, but I
You
can't
weren't
say
aware-
when.
you
No, I
weren't
wasn't
of coal
aware.
mining at all when you were a child?
No, because they hadn't opened up down below Tazewell,
Pocahontas.
and Pocahontas opened up rather late. Now, old man Sam will tell us when Pocahontas opened up. He was brought out here from Virginia. He was 7 years old, and his father came out here and worked in the mines. And then they had that terrible mine explosion, and I forget how many were killed. So they're going to talk about that in the history of Pocahontas next year. They're working for celebration.
Great centennial.
Mm-hmm.
The Pocahontas Coalfield Centennial will be in '83, of course. The office for that is up here in Bluefield.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
have an office up
Have
there.
they done much work around Pocahontas?
I don't know. I haven't gotten involved with them. I haven't asked to get involved. I didn't go volunteer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Well, when you first went, when you graduated, then you went to teach. Well, when you went to teach in West Virginia, what was that like?
That was at Coretta, West Virginia, and it was a small black school of about 12 or 15 children
That's McDowell County.
in McDowell County.
Did you live with families?
Yes, I first lived with a woman who had all men boarders that lived upstairs, and she didn't want to board a woman, but that's the only place I could get for a while, you know. And she said, well, I could keep you until some woman came back from North Carolina. She thought she would take me. But I boarded with her that 1 year. But the superintendent was Carroll from Carroll County, Virginia. And he was very strict. And the children, the parents didn't like for you to punish their children. Well, I brought up in punishment. And I thought that if your child done wrong, you had to punish him. I flipped him. So they had the superintendent to come and sit and watch me, and it made me very nervous. I was timid anyway. So when school was out, he said I should go into some other kind of work, that I wasn't fit for a teacher. So I thought I wasn't going to get anything else. I went to work in homes. I worked for the Leckies. Maybe you've heard of them in Welch. They were a rich coal operator there.
So you came back here?
I came back here and worked in homes and went on trying to. My sisters were teaching and they wanted to try to get me another school. And a friend of mine got me this school in Kentucky. And I taught down there across from Williamson, West Virginia. And that was a school that had 4 teachers that quit it in 1 year. 68 children. They said they had something like 70-some children. Had just come up from Alabama and Georgia. And they were just rough up there. And nearly every payday somebody was killed. So when I went there, well, I had 68 children in one-room school, all grades from 1st through the 8th. I went, and it was ruled by the Hatfields and McCoys. And Mr. York Hatfield was the postmaster, the superintendent of the schools. I don't know what else he was, a lawyer. So I went in one day and I said, Mr. Hatfield, I can't teach. He said, what are you doing, Minnie? I said, I have 68 children, all grades from the 1st through the 8th, and 21 in the 1st grade. I said, I just have the older children teaching them the alphabets because I can't teach them all. Well, when I was in school, we had 85 and 90, and we got along. If you can't do it, just leave. There it was. And I decided to try to hold on until Christmas. I didn't hold on until Christmas. I got so disturbed